This video for anybody who is looking to make a TRX6 rear wheel steer, or if you're looking to make it 6-wheel steer, this will also be useful in regards to the rear axle. This video is not about how to make the middle axle steer in the TRX6. There are videos on how you can do that because it's the same process as it is for a TRX4, where you simply flip the front axle to the back, and that will enable your rear axle steer on the TRX4 or middle axle steer on the TRX6. So this video is not about that. This video is about making the rear axle in the TRX6 steer. And what's so special about that rear axle in particular is you simply cannot take a front axle and flip it to the back and make it steer. It's not gonna work out well. Reason being is the diff gear position in the rear axle is actually mirrored that of the front axle. So if you do flip the front axle and put it in the back, what you will get is the diff spinning backwards. So it'll be spinning the opposite direction. So you cannot, I repeat, you cannot use a flipped front axle as the rearmost axle in the TRX6 to make it a turning axle. If you don't believe me, you can try and find out. So it's a bit of a project, a bit of a task to, all you gotta do is take the rear axle from a TRX6, make adjustments to it, and make it steer in a turnable axle. A few reasons, I guess, why people make the rear axle steer in these trucks. For me, I'm looking to gain some turning radius. I'm not gonna make my middle axle steer, like I'm not after a crab walk or anything like that. I don't think I have enough skill to even operate something like that on the trail or whatnot, but going after the rear axle steering to help my TRX6 bring in the rear end a little bit better into the turns. So there are 2 steps, actually 3 steps to having your rear axle steer in the TRX6. This video covers 2 of the 3, okay? And I'm just gonna tell you what they are. So step 1 is to actually make this rear axle into a turning axle, okay? That's step 1. Once you're done with step 1, what you're gonna get in the end is an axle that's going to be 5 millimeters wider on each side than what you started with, which is gonna have your front and middle axle 5 millimeters per side narrower. So step 2 of this project is to make middle and front axle same width, hex to hex, same width, hex to hex as your new turning rear axle. So again, part 1 is to creating a turning axle for the rear. Part 2 is doing a bit of work to middle and front axle to make them the same width as the rear axle, because the rear axle is going to be 10 millimeters wider, aka 5 millimeters on each side than the other 2 axles. Step 3, which is not covered in this video, is how you're actually going to steer it on your truck. Axle mounted servo, chassis mounted servo. Not this video, but that is the step 3 to having a rear steering axle. Let's quickly cover the parts that you will need for this job. Just keep in mind, again, the job is to make the rear axle of TRX6 be able to turn. So we're not talking about making the middle axle be able to turn here. So parts here is what you will need to make the rear axle turn. If you want to make the middle axle turn as well, you're going to need a few more parts than this. Anyway, so let's cover them real quick. You'll need these C-hubs, and this is what allows the turning to happen. It turns portals into turning portals. You will need 2 of these axle shafts. You'll be cutting them down, one a little bit more, but you need 2 of these. These are actually front axle shafts. You will need 2 of these front portal input gears. You will need 6 of these tiny screws. They're 2.5 by 4s. 2 of these bearings, 12 by 18 by 4. 2 of these bearings, 6 by 12 by 4. And obviously 2 of these inner portal covers. What else you will need is a set of MIP plus 4mm axle stubs, and in the video I'll explain to you why you need that and why you only need 4. We're only going to be using them on 2 out of the 3 axles. And another thing you're going to need, which I totally forgot to include here, is a 6mm hexes. You will need 4 of them. So these are 1mm thicker than the stock one. This is a 6mm hex. You're gonna need 4 of them to complete this job. So 4 6mm hexes, and you're gonna need 4 of these extended MIP truck kit package dealies. So MIP part number 18260. All these other numbers here are Traxxas part numbers, so you can easily you know, kind of find those parts. And bearings are just bearing dimensions that don't have to be Traxxas bearings. Yeah, so this is what you're gonna need to make the TRX6 rear axle into turning axle. I'm assuming here you already have the axle and like the portals with it. I did not include the actual portal housing, portal housing or the axle housing, because I'm assuming you already have it. Some of the parts from the rear axle will be getting reused, so these are the parts that are net new parts you're going to need to complete this project. A special note on this part, you're going to need 2 of these as mentioned. This is the front axle shaft. I believe it's the right one. It's the longer one. You will need 2 of these, and you'll need to cut both of them. So the stock length of this is 74.5mm. You're going to cut 2. First one is going to be cut down to 72mm. Second one is going to be cut down to 63mm. So when you cut it down to 63mm, good part of this end is going to be gone. Okay, so with that you will cut off this guy, this flat piece that goes into the diff. So you can use it as a template to know how much to grind the leftover shaft down to make it fit into the diff. There you go, this is the part. On the longer cut, most of this part will remain. You just have to grind down the size a little bit. But on the shorter 63mm piece is going to be cut off like maybe here. And then you will have to kind of grind the shaft to get something similar to this end. So don't throw it out, keep it. Remember to measure this. I think it's like maybe 6 or 7mm deep, and you'll have to grind it down to 3mm. This rod here is 4mm. You're gonna have to chop this down to grind it out to 3mm. So just removing the stock rear portal mounts, I guess, and putting the front C-hubs, and now our turning axle is starting to take shape. So cut number 1, here we're making the longer of the 2. This is going to be the 72 millimeter axle shaft. And I tried using this cutting disc. It was not the best idea. I would not use a cutting disc to do this. There was another attachment later in the video that worked much better. The picture of the first cut, 72 millimeters, just as we needed it. And here is cut number 2. This is the first part of the cut. First you gotta cut the rod or axle shaft short. And then you gotta grind it down to have that flat part to insert into the diff itself. Let's go ahead and see how our newly cut axle shafts fit. This is the longer one. As expected, it just fits right in. We didn't have to do a lot of work on this one. And this is the shorter one. I kind of started grinding it, but I didn't want to go too much before making sure it fits. So here it just needs a bit more work. It still doesn't fully fit into where we need it to go. So back to the shop and let's grind it some more. So now that we got our axles, time to put them into the portals. This one's kind of a little bit less than perfect, but as long as it fits, we're gonna go with it. So what happens next is we're gonna make the portals. And in order to do that, I'm gonna take the stock rears apart and use whatever parts we can out of them to put into the front portals that we're gonna put together. So next we'll go into a bit more detail of what can be reused and salvaged out of this rear portal. How we're gonna use the parts from here to create a front portal for the rear axle. I'm gonna take it apart and we'll just go from there. So the screws are out and we're just gonna grab a outer portal cover that we're gonna need to use to finish this front portal. So we're gonna pull this guy apart. We're going to reuse the outer portal cover. We're going to reuse the portal output gear, the pin, and the stock axle stub. Now we got all the parts that we need to start assembling back our turning portal. So we're going to reuse the outer portal cover that we got from the rear axle portal with this new inner portal cover that's typically used on the front, but we're going to use it here to put it in the rear. Now we're going to finish it off as the next step by inserting the portal input gear, which I have some right here, and attaching our axles. So now we got all the parts we need to complete these portals. So real quick, I'll just do a mock-up of what that's gonna look like. You probably already can imagine what that's gonna look like. Here we go. Another additional parts you will need are the 3 screws to go into the back of this portal cover to secure this bearing. And these little guys, they're 2.5 by 4. Yeah, right here. These guys. So it's Traxxas part number 8252. These 3 little guys that secure the bearing into the back of the portal cover. So got main pieces together. We have our rear axle. Let's put a gear in here. We're gonna do a mock-up fitment. Got our portals with our custom cut trimmed shafts here. And we're gonna do a dry fit or mock-up fit and see how things work. Not gonna screw anything. Just gonna see if things insert and rotate. Here we go. This is the 63mm axle here. It's the one that we cut. So let's try to rotate it. It doesn't go any further, which is good. And if we just rotate it, the holes line up perfectly, which means we got a pretty good cut. Cannot go any further, so it's all the way in, and our holes line up really well. All right, so let's try turning the axle now and see if our diff gear here spins. Okay, so make sure nothing terribly binding happening there. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's a crazy angle. Just, you'd never put your wheels at this angle to turn. So it's still working like this, and still holding on to this gear, to the shaft. Nothing's coming out, so that's good. I don't know, I'm kind of happy with this. Respect to all the people online that told me how long to cut it. Anyways, let's try the other side now. Whoa. This one should fit just as well. Here we go. Cannot go any further. It's good. Turn it. Check the holes. The holes, they line up. It's good. Now, let's try our spinning test. Yeah, it's good. We spin the axle. The gear and the diff turns. In there, good. All right. Putting it together now. Just attaching the portals to the axle. We tested the fitment in the mock-up stage. Yeah, it worked well in the mock-up stage. So now I just want to try it with the portals attached properly. I'm going to give it another rotation test. So all the screws, mounting screws, they all seem to line up pretty well. And our custom shaft seemed to insert it themselves really well as well. So here we go. This is what we got so far. So I'm just gonna turn one side and see what happens with the rest of the axle here. So our diff gear is spinning. What's happening with the other side? Oh yeah, it's also spinning. And I have these rotated like at the craziest angles, both directions, just to make sure nothing falls out, make sure our axles don't come out of here. No, it all seems to be pretty well. Nothing is like moving. Yeah, we're close. We're close to having a rear turning axle for TRX6. Here's our turning TRX6 rear axle. Now it's almost put together, it's almost finished. So what we're going to do now is do a quick test, make sure nothing binds when the axle spin, make sure nothing binds when there's input into the axle. So yeah, let's have a look. He's going to spin it at the rear here, and we're just going to watch T ends and make sure they spin without binding or doing any funny business. So here you go. And it seems to be spinning pretty well on that side. Let's see the other side. Yeah. Also seems to be rotating as desired. What if we add a bit of a turning angle on it? See here. Yeah. The right side spins. And the left side also spins. Okay. This looks good. Looks promising. The key thing to keep in mind is when our new axle is put together, is going to be about 10 millimeters wider than the other two axles. Okay, so I'm just showing you what happens here. We can just use this caliper to see the distance between the portals. This is a front axle, the stock front axle. So we've got about 139 millimeters. Just the distance we're measuring right here. Now on this guy here, we should see exactly 10 millimeters longer. So here we go. 149, 150, it's close enough. So because of this, here you go. You will need to find a new drag link that's 10 millimeters longer than the stock drag link. So this one here, I'm pretty sure it's from one of the axial cars. Don't know which one. And then I just used the stock Traxxas rod ends, put them on here. And I got exactly 10 millimeter incremental spacing between the portals. So this should work. Alright, so yeah, just keep that in mind. So this axle ends up being about 10 millimeters wider than the other two axles, so 5 millimeters on each side. Like if we look at this guy here, this is the middle axle. I don't know if you can tell by eye, but anyways, there's a difference. And the best way to compensate for that, I found, is to keep the rear axle studs and hexes stock. Like that part, you gotta keep them all stock. While the middle axle, you gotta use the longer hexes, longer studs and thicker hexes. Show you what I mean. So here's a stock axle stub, with the stock hex. And if we take this measurement here, we got, 27 millimeters. Okay. Now, that's what's in here. Whatever we're putting here needs to be 5 millimeters longer per side. So if we take the MIP extended stub, which is plus 4 millimeters, but we need 1 more millimeter, right? And we can take a hex that's 1 millimeter thicker than stock, and 1 millimeter thicker than stock is going to be 6 millimeters. The stock one is 5 mil. So what we're going to get is, again, if the stock one is 27 millimeters, yeah, there you go, 27 millimeters. If we take a bigger hex and a longer stud, this is what we're going to get. This is almost 32 millimeters, which is perfect. This works out to be 5 millimeters per side longer. So this here, plus 4 millimeters on the stud, plus 1 millimeter on the hex, is what we're gonna put into the middle axle and the front axle. And that will give us exactly same stance width on all 3 axles. I'm going to use this combo, our stud that's 4 millimeters longer and a hex that's 1 millimeter thicker, and I'm going to put that to the middle axle, and we'll do the same for the front axle, and that should give us exactly the same width on all 3 axles. Now we're going to open up one of the front portals, and we're just going to swap this part for this part. This piece here is 4 millimeters longer. So remember to do that for your front axle and your middle axle as well, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm just gonna swap it out, and just remember, after that you still need a hex, a 6 millimeter hex, and that way your front axle and your middle axle will be same width as your new steering rear axle. Alright, so all we're doing is putting this guy in. Okay. Just gonna open up the portal. Remove the pin, the gear. It's a little bit slimy. Wipe it off. So here you go. You can see the difference. So here, the stud on the right is 4 millimeters longer. Like if you look at where the pinholes are, they're 4 millimeters apart. So we're installing this guy. So we're just gonna take the pin, put it in the stud, put the gear back on, and it's nice and closed. And here's the one I'm yet to replace. You can see the difference in the stud. So this is what you want. You want this. Here we have our front and middle axle almost complete. We have gone ahead and installed the MIP Y-Track kit onto the front and middle axle. And this is the kit once again. Comes with 4 studs and 4 spacers. So you're going to be installing this into the front axle and the middle axle. Do not install the wide track kit into the rear axle. In the rear axle, we'll be using all stock parts. Now, what's left to do here is take our 6mm hexes and install them onto these 2 axles. And typically I would of course put Loctite on it, but for the sake of this video, just kind of showing the steps and the process. I will be Loctiting this later. Please always do that. Alright, so remember, you're not doing this to the rear axle. The rear axle stays all stock once you're done with it. Here's what I mean. We have our stock hex and stock axle stubs here. And on the front and the middle axle, we have our extended axle studs. You can tell by the red spacers. And we have our 6mm hexes. So by doing so, now the front and the middle axle are same width as the new rear axle. So one thing to do to see if you did it right is to measure from hex to hex. Each axle should be between 207 to 208 millimeters. So from hex to hex, from hex to hex, between 207 to 208 millimeters. If they're all within our range, you did it right using the method in this video. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, and check out my other videos.